Hey everybody, Matt here, and I wanted to tell you about something cool my publisher is offering if you pre-order my forthcoming book, Filthy Rich Politicians. After you do that, go to filthyrichbook.com and sign up, enter your receipt number, and I will send you an autographed book plate. You will also have access to Chapter 1 and the intro. You can download that immediately today, as well as access to a podcast where I talk about the book. So, pre-order Filthy Rich Politicians and go to filthyrichbook.com today to get these bonuses. Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
We're Thursday morning. It's day 3 where I am breathing in wildfire particulate matter. I don't know how it's been where you are.
There is a plume over us, Bill. It's bad. Not as bad as New York City, but not good where I am, even here in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. My kids have been going to a church camp. It's pretty cool. It's called the Around the World Camp, and each day they're in a different country. So yeah, like one day was Syria, one day was France, and they're eating crepes and whatever, and learn. It's sort of for like, I don't know if you're going to be a missionary or something, I guess. But my one son couldn't go today. He was outside all day yesterday and had some symptoms, some throat issues, and even ear issue, he said. And I can only imagine that it's related to this particulate. So he's home inside in air conditioning right now.
Well, we haven't had any home health problems, thankfully, but last couple of days, I mean, you can smell it.
Yeah.
Actually, 2 days ago, we're driving into school, and my daughter was like, "Why is the sun so red?" I'm like, it's the sunrise. It's like that. I think that I didn't know what was going on. And then I figured I put 2 and 2 together later in the day, but you could really smell it.
You're like, well, son, daughter, it's the end of times. The moon will be blood red. Yeah, it's weird. It's bad. I do feel like environmentalists are mishandling this a little bit. Like, I don't know if you've seen Bernie Sanders tweets and all that. It very well may be that forest fires are more common with climate change and all of that. I do think there's been so much kind of doom and gloom over the years and things that just haven't, like dire warnings that haven't panned out, that they might be better off to say something like this. Like, we don't know if there's a cause and effect this time, but if you don't like having to check the weather that day or check like the EPA website to know whether you can go outside today, then maybe we should start taking care of the environment, because like we don't want to get to a place where literally this is a kind of an everyday occurrence.
What do you think
so it may actually hit, I guess my point is there's a chance this may hit home with people who had never really thought about environmental problems. I just think there's a way to
isn't what you're saying what they're saying? I'm not grasping the distance between what you're doing and what they're doing.
No, number one, I'm cool. They're not. Number two, no, I feel like they always overplay everything. And it's like, they're essentially saying that what's happening today is the product of climate change. We told you that this is what would happen. And the problem is, like, if it snows a lot, they say it's climate change. If it's super hot, they say it's like whatever happens, they say weather is climate change. And I think they've lost a little bit of credibility. But I do think that this is an opportunity for people, if they're not, you can't beat up people over the heads with things, but this is an opportunity for people who haven't been sensitive to concerns about climate change to have a real experience where it's impacting their lives. They may come to this themselves in a way, but I think that they're going to be turned off to it if it's like if they're hit over the head with it a little too much.
I have a different take on that, because I think we're at a place now. I feel like the climate change is a hoax argument is pretty dead. I'm not even really seeing Republicans push it that hard anymore. Trump was doing that to some extent, but I feel like it's really lost its oomph. So I don't even think it's that hard for people to connect those dots anymore. What I think is sort of maddening to environmentalists is you can connect those dots. It doesn't automatically lead to this particular policy. And that's been the jump that they've always struggled with. This climate change is happening, therefore we should do these things that are going to be they're going to change your life in some way.
Yeah.
That's harder.
But
Uh,
I think change, I agree. But I think this is a weird analogy, Bill, but let me compare it to like if and when the Republican Party ever moves past Donald Trump, it is going to happen in a way that is weird and messy. And no one's ever going to say, you were right, man. You were right all along. But it's going to happen, I hope, at some point. And I feel like a lot of change, a lot of political change, societal change happens. And it happens when people kind of come to conclusions on their own. And there isn't that moment of closure or you don't get to say and
well,
but I think it's and now you may say like the climate change thing is so dangerous that we have to tackle it today. We can't give we can't give people time to accept this kind of on their own terms.
well, I think another change that's happened, so on one hand, I think the Republican Party has been less focused on disproving climate change. Um, Parallel to that, I think the Democratic Party has been less interested in pushing a universal Green New Deal, this will solve everything singular package. I think they were very burned by the attempt to pass cap and trade in the Obama presidency. The AOC Green New Deal thing was a political disaster. Uh, and the Biden people came in, uh, openly downplaying the idea of doing something like a carbon tax and suggesting that you can't do this in a way that's going to feel like a hardship on people. So I think they're trying to hit a lot of singles under the radar, slip things here in the Inflation Reduction Act. Here's some money we're going to put into things. We're going to do some regulatory things here and there. But it's not meant to be hit you over the head,
Yeah.
change your life abruptly with heavy doses of sacrifice. They're really moved
Yeah,
away from that.
and I think that's wise. I mean, look, there may be occasions where we have to act very quickly and there is not time to bring the public along. Like I'm willing to accept that those conditions may exist in at some point, but we are generally speaking much better off if you can get public buy-in on things and if you can bring people along. And it may be at least now look, this what's happening is only happening kind of like in the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, I guess, right? I mean, it's not happening. Well, California is they're used to their own wildfires out west, right? But but I'll tell you, I mean, living where I live, like in my lifetime, I've never experienced anything like this. The idea that something that happened in Canada would affect us like this. And by the way, as I tweeted this morning, Alex P. Keaton was way ahead of the curve when he said he sitting in West Virginia, as I recall, he wanted to attack Canada. He was going to fly a mission and bomb Canada in the morning. He was on to something.
um, well, outside of wildfires, it's been a pretty busy news week. Um, we've had several Republican candidates jump into the race. I feel like I think the field is set. I don't think we're expecting someone else of real stature to jump in between now and what tends to be the first debate in August. So we had Pence, Christie, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum jump in this week, and so on top of Trump, DeSantis, Haley, Scott. Um, I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy. I guess I have to mention. I'm
I
missing.
mean, I wouldn't short sell him at this point. either. I mean, he's got potential. So, not to win, but to make a splash.
Well, he's playing that Andrew Yang role right now, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna. I still do. I mean, Yang, as much as I disrespect Andrew Yang then and now, like he had an idea. He was bringing universal basic income to the table, which no one else was bringing to the table. So there was some reason of being there. Vivek is like, I'm anti woke. Well, join the frickin' party. You're all anti woke in the Republican primary right now. So I just don't. I mean, he's sustaining on an unlimited bank account. I mean, he's made a decent amount of telegenic quality, but I don't think he has an idea that really makes him distinct. But I don't want to make this into a Vivek conversation because I
All right.
have no interest in it. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think about this field? Do you agree this field is set? Uh,
Essentially, yeah. And I think that, as you know, Tim Scott, I like, and I think he's got potential for growth just based on kind of likability and affability. And Chris Christie, you know, I
we've
don't
heard
think he,
Christie before. I've been excited to have someone really bring
yeah,
the wood to Trump.
he's doing it.
Do,
He's
do, do, you- do you
delivering.
think he had
He's
a
delivering.
good 48 hours?
Yeah. And I think he will continue to be. I mean, somebody who is, look, he's a political athlete. He's talented. He can talk. He is a prosecutor. He can prosecute the case against Trump. He is very smart. He is very quick witted. He's fast on his feet. He's tough. Now, look, I've got other problems with him having to do with character questions about how is it that you supported Donald Trump before? You voted for him in 2020, not just 2016 when you endorsed him. I think he voted for him in 2020. So there are serious problems with Christie, but he has delivered on, I think, the promise of Chris Christie. The promise of Chris Christie was never, in my opinion, that he was going to win. It was that he would attack Trump and that he could do so more effectively than anybody else. So far, so good.
I still think Christie needs help. It can't just be Chris Christie. It can't be a bunch of people who want to say Chris Christie saying and saying, "Thank you for doing it. I want to keep my mouth shut over here." It's got to start a broader echo chamber of other Republicans saying, Chris Christie's on to something. He's got to make you nod. I mean, I think Chris Christie has potential to say things that no one else has been willing to say because they're coherent, they land, they resonate, and you're like, yeah, that's right. That's why he didn't build the wall. He didn't. Mexico didn't pay for the corridor that did
Yeah.
get built. Maybe he can't really deliver on things, but other people have to start joining in. Uh,
Well, I mean, DeSantis has started joining in, albeit in a less effective way. Asa Hutchinson has been joining in. Nikki Haley tiptoes around it sometimes.
I think people outside of the field have to
Yeah,
join in. It has to
yeah.
feel like it's not just people who have an opportunity to
And that could,
reason.
but I do think that what could happen, right? It's like in Rocky 4. He's cut. The Russian's been cut, and it's a bad cut. Like, the odds are Trump will never be cut, right? And I don't even know if Trump and Christie will ever actually be on a debate stage together.
Well, that's
That
another
may
big
not
thing.
happen.
Are we
But
having debates?
Christie is a dangerous man, and there is a chance that Christie will draw blood at some point on Donald Trump in some way. And if and when that happens, other people may then feel emboldened to pile on. It may be a sort of permission structure that Christie provides that someone else will ultimately benefit from.
I mean, Christie might need to have that debate moment to really start the deluge of Trump criticism and skepticism. I have a really hard time seeing why Trump would go to a debate. What is the upside for Trump going to a debate?
All right, fair point. As you know, Trump loves attention. Um, and so that's one. He loves being in the mix and getting the attention and all that. What if there's a debate and Christie qualifies and Christie dominates? and Christie basically destroys the other candidates, essentially calling them wimps because they're not willing to stand up to Trump. And Christie just has a standout night and is getting all this attention. I mean, it's possible that that could lure Trump. Now, if Trump is smart and strategic, he wouldn't let that lure him into a debate. But Trump is who he is, and so I think there's a chance that it could play out that way. Again, would I bet on it? No, but is it possible? Yes.
So, forgive me if I missed something. So you're saying Trump would do the debate on the hope that Chris Christie lays on everybody else?
No, no, no. What I'm saying is, if there is a debate and Chris Christie shows up at that debate and basically calls Donald Trump a chicken and
Because
then proceeds
Trump's not there.
because Trump's not there,
Okay.
and then proceeds to like attack Nikki Haley for not having the guts to stand up to Donald Trump, attack Ron DeSantis for not having the guts to actually mention Trump's name. And again, he has to pull this off.
But
He can't just
but
try
if,
it.
if Trump doesn't show up, why does DeSantis show up?
I think if you're DeSantis, you have to
Why?
because
This is not a
his
Trump,
polling numbers aren't good.
Trump's not in
Trump's the
this.
front
It's not a
runner.
real debate.
When you're the front runner, um, then there's an argument that you shouldn't show up strategically.
I mean,
Like
if Trump's
there's
not
nothing to gain.
there,
There's nothing to gain.
DeSantis is the target. Why
Okay.
subject yourself to that? And you can
You may be
can
right.
punk out because Trump already punked out. So you're not the first person who's chicken. This is you can say this is not even a real debate. Why should I bother to show up?
Yeah, you may be right. I'd be surprised. Again, this fits into the category of Ron DeSantis would be better off if Bill Scher were running his race, probably. I doubt they're going to do that. I think they will see it as an opportunity. Oh, this is our chance to show that we're the front runner. And we're not doing so well that we can afford to just brush it off and skip this one. We have to show up. I mean, it's probably going to be like in Iowa or something. I don't know. Do we know that they finally? I think they finally gave the conditions. You have to have 1% of the vote, and how many is it? Like 40,000 donors or
Right.
something like that. I don't know if
Just,
they've.
I mean, the thing is, I hate that these donor thresholds. Your Democrats pioneered this, and if you got a good grift going, you've got some kind of social media presence. You can get on, Joe Rogan or some other kind of niche show. You can
Okay,
go on with Elon Musk on Twitter.
we get that you don't like Andrew Yang.
Yeah, right.
We get
But
that.
you can then do an email blast. You build up an email list. You do a blast. Buy my hat for $1. Boom! You got 40,000 donors. Haven't given you all that much money, and it's not real evidence of broad-based support. But this is what a whole bunch of Democrats did just to meet that threshold, and then you have these cacophonous debates that didn't really boil down into who are the real contenders here, and having a robust conversation about the direction of the party.
I mean, how would you do it then?
I would. I like poll thresholds better than donor thresholds. If you're gonna have a numeric threshold, but honestly, if I had my druthers, I would just do the invites the way I wanted to do them. I'm the RNC and the DMC. I decide you get an invite because we're the party and the party decides. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. I don't have to invite the grifter. I don't have to invite the person who's got zero resume, who's got no business running for president. I'm just not obligated to do that.
I like that theoretically, but the problem is in today's Republican Party, that means the list is Donald Trump shows up and no, like one person is invited, Donald Trump.
I mean, you could have kept Donald Trump out of this business from the get go.
I know, but
attitude.
that ship has sailed.
Right.
You're right.
It's hard to have a resume line when you just had a president who had no political resume.
Yeah. Well, in any event, what I guess the upshot of all the stuff I'm saying is that I agree with you that Chris Christie faces a lot of obstacles. Like even if his only goal is just to take down Trump, that still may be unattainable just like logistically it may be, because he may not have an opportunity to face him in a debate, and doing it outside of a debate is tough. The point I'm making is I think it may be possible because Trump is susceptible to things. Like, he's susceptible to flattery, he's also susceptible to sort of being baited by demonstrating his manhood and not being embarrassed. It may be possible that Christie can find a way to kind of talk Trump onto that debate stage against Trump's best self-interest. But it's not going to be easy. Um, and I don't know what else to say other than that.
The thing about this debate question, because again, I think Christie's ability, I mean, maybe he can find other ways to draw blood outside of a debate, but we know he's good on a debate stage. Uh, this goes back to Katie Hobbs. You know, Katie Hobbs proved you can just skip a debate and voters probably don't care. Now, maybe you can say that's an anonymous example. Maybe it doesn't apply in all situations. But if Trump is lapping the field, if he's beating DeSantis, around 50%, DeSantis is 20. If I'm Donald Trump, I would make the conclusion, I don't think these people expect me to debate. They know who I am. They don't have
Yeah.
to kick the tires. They're not
Yeah,
going
but you're a rational actor. I mean, I think you make a valid point. I think if I'm Trump, um, I do that until it stops working.
right.
I mean, if at some point you see, oh, this
I mean,
data,
the only
there's
way that
data.
Trump is forced in this debate, in my opinion, is one, his numbers collapse. And so he's got to do something to get back in the game. Or he's such a narcissist that he can't walk away from a chance to be on a TV show that has a lot of
Okay,
ratings.
and I think you just explained why there's a good chance he will be in some of the debates at least, right? I mean, he
But
is a
I
narcissist.
feel like in some respects, he's behaving more like a regular candidate. You know, doing the more retail things in Iowa, the smaller events, not always doing the big rallies. And maybe that is, you might think, by necessity, because the rallies have too many empty chairs. He doesn't want to have
Yeah.
you see that. Um,
His
but
his well, his new strategist, I mean, I say new, it's just like 6 months old or maybe 9 months old, is, Chris Lasavita. Do you know Chris? Are
I
you
don't.
familiar with
I
Chris
don't.
Lasavita? I know. I worked for him once upon a time. Um, Smart guy, former Marine. He was George Allen's uh, main strategist. Very tough. Um, and I wonder. I mean, I wonder if maybe Lasavita is able to. I don't want to put this wrong, but able to control Trump or influence Trump in a way that other advisors were not. Because I do think you're right. Even though Trump still does crazy stuff, there's other instances where he's running an actual campaign as well.
So Chris Christie at least starts his campaign the way he wanted to start it. I do a town hall. It's well attended. I make my points. I prove that I'm willing to say what I think and really give
And he
Trump
does it
more
with
support.
flair too.
Right,
He does it with panache.
right.
I
He,
mean,
I think,
Asa Hutchinson might say a lot of the same things. He does not do it with panache.
right. DeSantis came out there perhaps less smoothly, but he has been making his points. I'm more conservative than Trump on immigration. He wanted an amnesty. He passed criminal justice reform that was too liberal. I wouldn't do that. The same time, I might pardon some of these January 6 people because the justice department's weaponized. And he's developing his platform the way he wants to. Here comes Mike Pence yesterday, talking fairly heavily about what happened on January 6th, just selling himself as the guy who put the Constitution first, hitting Trump on abortion, saying Trump's not as resolute on abortion as he is, saying that Trump's ducking the entitlements discussion about Social Security and Medicare. So he is and also pushing the Ukraine point hard. So he put forth his Reagan Republican argument, if you will,
Reagan.
Does he start the race as best as he could start it?
I think he started the race as best as he could start it, and that's still not good enough. I don't know that Mike Pence has a constituency in the modern era. Um, he was heroic on January 6th, and and obviously I'm partial to the Reagan conservatism thing. Um, but generally speaking, I think that Mike Pence has alienated a lot of people who think he sucked up to Trump, and he simultaneously alienated all the Trump people who think he sold Trump out. And if you take away those two groups, I just don't see how. I'm not sure how you get to a majority.
I mean,
Uh,
I mean,
the one bet maybe he has is Iowa, right? I mean, I assume that Mike Pence will just run for governor of Iowa,
well, a lot
essentially.
of them will because not to say that Trump did not win 4 years ago. It's heavily Christian conservative. That the Republican caucus electorate there hasn't always been Trump's strongest base. So everyone, and New Hampshire might seem like a harder. It's a quirkier state, might be a harder place to get a foothold in. So yeah, I think a lot of folks are going to bet the chips on Iowa, but of course they can't. They can't all win Iowa.
Yeah.
Um,
And even if you win Iowa, then what, right? I mean,
Often the Iowa win in the Republican Party is not the nominee. It was not Ted Cruz.
yeah,
It was
Rum
not
Rick
Rick
Santorum
Santorum.
won it.
Right.
Now, he was screwed out of it
Right.
though because
It took a few days for him to
Iowa
win.
can't count votes.
Right.
So, but nevertheless,
But-
it's possible that Mike Pence puts all his chips on Iowa,
right.
wins it, and then what? He
Right.
gets nothing anyway.
And
But
in
the
2008,
theory is,
McCain
right?
scooped out in Iowa.
The theory is you win Iowa,
Yeah.
and then you figure out how to parlay that into something else.
Right. I mean, I think the only way Pence gets this is, you know, murder, suicide, DeSantis, Trump, murder, suicide, Christie, DeSantis, Trump, triple murder, suicide.
And you mean this literally. Like, you're not talking about the way that Christie did a murder suicide on Rubio. You mean like they actually have to kill each other. If they're dead, Mike Pence has a chance.
There's always the heart attack, possibility.
You know,
But I think there has to be some major changes in the basic contours of the Republican electorate because the current frontrunners are seen as damaged, and it makes people reassess their life choices. Um, uh, let me ask you this as somewhat of a corollary question. So here's Pence saying essentially, he'll ban abortion. He'll ban abortion every which way. There's no limit to how much you would ban abortion. Chris
every which way
Christie,
but loose.
well, right. Chris Christie in the town hall, he was asked a question by someone assuming he was pro-choice. And Christie's response was, hey, Republicans, we won. We got rid of Roe v. Wade, and now it's left to the states, and that's the way it should be. And the federal government should stay out of it. And other folks like Haley and Scott have been kind of wishy-washy what exactly they would do, but seems they're open to a federal 6-week or 15-week. And it's a little unclear what Trump would accept right now. Where do you think the Republican electorate is on this post Roe v. Wade? Are they in a settled place where they want a specific thing and they want to have a candidate say that thing, or are they kind of scattered right now because they won this thing they wanted for 50 years? They don't quite know what to do with it right now.
All right, I'm going to pull up a quote. Morning Joe this morning got real philosophical when there was a quote from Reinhold Niebuhr was invoked. Did you see this today, Bill?
No, I did not.
Who's the guy? I can't think of his name right now. He used to be at like Time Magazine or Newsweek, like back when it was prestigious. And now, then he was like a speechwriter. He's a historian. He was like a speechwriter for Biden. Do you know who I mean?
You mean Meekum? You mean John Meekum?
Yes.
Okay.
Meekum. What's his
Okay.
first name?
This is John Meekum?
I think so. Anyway, he gave this, I never knew this Reinhold Niebuhr quote. The sad duty of politics is to establish justice in a sinful world. And that's kind of the problem when it comes for people who are pro-life right now, because we live in a messy, fallen world, and politics um, isn't equipped necessarily to deal with that. So you oftentimes will end up with the least bad option. Um, and so, for example, we've talked about this a million times how I'm pro life, but politically, I would support exceptions. And the problem with those exceptions are that they would seem to undermine the notion that a life is sacred, right? Because if a life is sacred, but you have an exception, then what happened to this is an unborn child?
Mhm.
You end up with these contradictions, right? And so it's kind of easier to take hardline approaches, but then at some point they become really politically untenable. I think Christie's answer was pretty astute politically because it
For the Republican
avoids.
primary or for the general electorate?
I would say both. I would say both. Um, and for a couple of reasons. One is I think that what is it, what is worse than being called a squish or a liberal is looking like a squish. Like Christie has a position, he has a stance, and it is defensible. I mean, you could argue, look, I thought Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided. I thought it was horrible. I don't think 9 men in robes should you know, decide this big issue. And so we fought, and now it's going to be decided in locals and states and communities. I'm not saying that morally that's where I am, philosophically or theologically, but he's in better shape than do you remember uh uh Tim Scott, who like had no position?
Mhm.
Once you start well, 6 weeks is okay, but 5 weeks is bad. I mean, like once you get into that game, it's rough.
I my gut feeling is you in this regard are representative of the median Republican voter, which is that you don't have right now a very precise exact position you're demanding a Republican candidate give. You're basically you give me 6 weeks, you give me 15 weeks, you give me this exception or that exception, like you'll take it. If you're moving the ball forward, you take it. If the best you can do is the Chris Christie up to the state stance, all right, fine. At least I get it in some states. Like you're not really looking for you don't have a red line that's separating one candidate from another. Now maybe some of those folks are out there.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
it-
part of
it-
it is, I mean, again, I don't want to get bogged down to this too much, but going back to that Reinhold Niebuhr quote, um, you know, if my position is that all abortion is bad and we shouldn't have abortion, and then the next question is if I impose that, what happens? And it probably will be that that's an untenable position that will result in more abortions. And so there are all these unintended consequences. So politics is messy. It'd be a lot easier to okay, I'm going to go to the monastery and I'm going to pray and I'm going to, you know, advocate for no abortions at all. And hopefully I would be advocating for help for, for mothers and support for children and all that. But once you get involved in politics, I mean, let's look at Ron DeSantis. If Ron DeSantis becomes the Republican nominee, which I think is unlikely, but if he's the Republican nominee, the 6-week ban that he signed is going to make it very tough for him to beat Joe Biden. Like that will be the issue, in my opinion.
So you
Whereas
could
if he
even
had
say,
the
well, for
15-week,
Florida, I'm not going to make that national policy. He could shift to the Christie position depending on what he says during this primary.
fair point. I don't know that he would do it. This falls into the category of DeSantis should have Bill Scher managing his campaign, but so should Joe Biden. Let's be honest.
Let me shift to the piece that I just have published at the Washington Monthly, which relates to all this, and we talked about it a little to some extent on the last
Yes.
show. Uh, so there's a Republican wine track, and the thing that I got uncovered in researching this piece is we haven't had a Republican wine track before. So if you're defining wine track as a candidate with appeal largely centered on college graduates.
Okay. So even though Huntsman and Romney um sort of stylistically fit that
You know,
mold, they
Rom
were still
Romney,
they were still getting the bulk of Republican votes were still coming from like non-college educated
well, Hudson barely
voters.
had any votes. Like he's a non-entity in this. But you go back and look at the exit poll data from 2008, from 2012, from 2016. You don't. I mean, in 2008, when it was kind of three-way McCain, Romney, Huckabee, you don't see very clear patterns with education level. The divide there is evangelical, non-evangelical. So Huckabee is very strong with evangelicals, um, but it isn't really a diploma divide. In fact,
But
there
there's
are a couple of states where McCain does a little better with higher
yeah,
educated, and a couple of states where Romney does better with higher educated, and McCain's doing better with lower educated. Um,
is okay. I think that educational attainment is one way to get there. I would I would suspect though that there's also class, which doesn't necessarily always directly correlate with education, and that there may be like suburban soccer mom type folks, wine moms, who are more pro Romney, regardless of their educational attainment. But that would be harder to.
the thing about
You'd have to
look
look
at
at
the
zip codes maybe or
when you look at the
something.
income level data, and I didn't do it as closely as I did with the education part, but there's some overlap between income and age. You're older, you tend to have more money, so it's a little
Yeah,
hard
but
to
even
separate
but see,
out.
that's the problem with income. It's older people have more money, and you could be a plumber, but you're not on the wine track. But if you're in the managerial class, as the term of art nowadays, um, managerial class is wine track, right?
Um, but again, I mean, you need to have some data to show that these camps are really politically distinct within your electorates. I mean, we have in the Democratic Party examples going back a long time, going back to Gary Hart in '84, Paul Tsongas in '92, Bill Bradley 2000, Howard Dean 2004, um, and 2020 Elizabeth Warren, uh, having their niche candidates where their support was really concentrated with people who are college graduates, and having a hard time getting beyond that
Yeah.
to reaching to a pool of people of color as well as white working class. And you just haven't seen that on the Republican side. You may have, some, slight skews in terms of age or income, even a little bit with college degree, but it has the biggest divides that I see in the 21st century. I had a hard time finding data going back earlier. Um, is evangelical, non-evangelical. Um, but now Trump is Romney was a little bit better in 2012 with college educated, but it wasn't stark. Trump was a
I would
little
have
bit better with non-college educated, but still was holding his own with college educated. It wasn't that big a difference. And I should also add that the Republican electorate is pretty evenly split between college and non-college. So it's not an insignificant thing to look at.
hmm.
But right now, the gap between the Trump margin over DeSantis with college and non-college is 20 to 30 points. I mean, it is huge. There is nothing like that in all these other races that I'm talking about.
Super interesting. Again,
Uh,
I would wonder if again, there may not have been data, but I would have assumed that like George H.W. Bush would have been the college candidate over Reagan.
And I would bet that was the case. But I
Yeah.
haven't looked at that data. But that would
I
make
mean, there
sense.
must have been a correlation between like you assume the quote country club Republican is more the wine track and the more Goldwater Reagan Republican is more non-wine track or more beer. But whatever the case may be, Bill, put that aside. Whether this is unprecedented or not, it's unprecedented. It hasn't happened in a long time, and it seems stark. And what do you make? Like, what are we to make of this? Why is this happening? And what does it mean? I assume it's. I would assume based on the Democratic Party's history, being the wine track candidate does not bode well for you.
Well, when you're stuck on the wine track, you do not become the nominee. I mean, so I wrote a big piece about this for Politico back in for 2020. I mean, you have two examples of Democrats who had heavy white college support who did get the nomination, and they are Barack Obama and Mike Dukakis. In the case of Barack Obama, he paired his white college vote with heavy African American vote. That was unstoppable.
He could
Yeah,
also do that thing where he could talk like Oprah does. It's like a rural Southern populist thing. I don't even know how to describe it, but he didn't sound or always look highfalutin.
right.
He could play drop his G's.
Mhm.
Is that what it is? Dropping your G's, code
Well,
switching.
I mean,
He could do it. I don't think Michael Dukakis from Massachusetts
a
could
different
play
dynamic.
that
And
game.
the thing that
Yeah.
happened in '88 was the Democrats were trying to shape their primary calendar to heavily weight Southern states so they wouldn't get saddled with a Northeastern liberal. Uh, and what happened was
Unintended consequences.
the Southern states divided between Al Gore and Jesse Jackson. So you have all these Southern African Americans who were excited about Jesse, and you had a much bigger white working class contingent in the party who were partial to a Southern like Al Gore. So they divide, and Dukakis is able to essentially coast above that. I mean, Dukakis won some state. He won Texas. He won Florida. With pluralities. So he had just enough to go beyond the Northeast base and eke it out. But because his base wasn't as broad as Barack Obama's, he wasn't in as great a place to win the general election after that. So a lot of fluky things had to occur for that wine tracker to make it happen. So you haven't had either of those dynamics exist for all these other wine track Democrats that I mentioned before. So on the Republican side, the question remains: how does one put together a demographically diverse coalition within the confines of the Republican electorate? Particularly if Donald Trump is hogging so much of the of what's available. So there's that. So as far as winning is concerned, being stuck on this wine track is not helpful. But there's another layer to this here, because a lot of these Democratic candidates I mentioned had influence in the party, even though they didn't win. Gary Hart was a pioneer in talking about worker retraining to so the working class could get high tech jobs, which became part of the trade policies of Bill Clinton. You had Paul Tsongas disparaging Bill Clinton's middle class tax cut as pandering because it wasn't serious about deficit reduction. Clinton becomes president, he junks the middle class tax cut and gets more serious about deficit reduction. Howard Dean made being anti-war far more politically plausible in the Democratic Party, because at that point, still in the post 9/11 period, Democrats were defending the Iraq War in a lot of cases. And then with Elizabeth Warren, Biden picks a lot of Warrenites to join his administration and take that wonky populism, that antitrust ethos into a lot of his regulatory policy. So because they had a niche that was distinct, their ideas could have some resonance in the party. So my question with the Republicans now is, do we have a Republican wine track? Do they have a set of ideas that will influence the party, even though that their favorite candidate might not get the nomination. And when you look
Well,
at sorry, go
as
on.
you noted in the piece, it's a wine track in the sense that they're highly educated, um, but it's not the wine track you think of with the Democratic Party, right?
Right.
The
These
Democratic
are not
Party,
John
you think
Huntsman Republicans.
no, this isn't like, "Oh, Buffy, we've gotta get the Tesla to" you don't even have to get
They
Teslas to
might
the
have a
Mail.
Tesla at this point because there's an indication that this is a
Yeah,
Ron DeSantis, Elon Musk constituency.
exactly, and that's why when DeSantis announces his campaign with Elon Musk, and they're talking about DEI and Bitcoin, it's these are things that very online, mostly guys who are college educated, like, these are think Josh Hawley. I call these people in well, I didn't coin this phrase, but in the forthcoming, out in 6 weeks, Bill, Filthy Rich Politicians, I have a chapter on Ivy League populists, and I think that's what this kind of is. In some, DeSantis is an Ivy leaguer. I think Josh Hawley, who's partial to wine and wine stores, fits into this category. Um, this is what it is. So this is the Republican wine track. It is highly educated people, um, and they're really into stuff like DEI and Bitcoin and debanking and things like that. Like, it's kind of conspiratorial. Um, I think it reminds me of who was the candidate who ran for Senate in Arizona?
Blake Masters.
Republic. Yeah, that guy, Blake Masters, who like has he was like a Peter Thiel protege, and
Right.
like he's obviously smart. He just had a lot of time on his hands, and you tend to think of like cosmopolitan elites as being very mainstream and liberal, but man, too much time on your hands, you start like thinking outside the box a
Right.
little too much, and
Look,
like,
these don't seem like median college educated voters nationally. There seems to be a distinct breed of Republican college educated voters that are wrapped up in all these issues that you cite. Now,
but they're into weird
yeah,
stuff, man, because they're
yeah,
smart enough to know about weird stuff and to read like Karl Marx and all sorts of philosophic, like they've been educated beyond their intelligence, is how I like to describe it. And so I think that's kind of what it is.
So now maybe we're early. This is we've barely started
Yeah.
here. So maybe as DeSantis gets scrutinized, that his support weakens and other candidates pick up that college educated support on a different set of issues. So I don't want to suggest that we know everything there is to know at this juncture. Um, but we are seeing a distinct class of Republican that we haven't seen in past races. And so it's worth tracking to see what are the issues that really hold this group together. Uh, do they have a set of issues that are going to influence the party going forward? And is that influence going to be good for the party going forward? Is that something that they really do? Should other Republicans say, well,
Yeah.
this is healthy that we're having this rich discussion because really should be uh, loose on crypto and stop the Federal Reserve from having a digital currency because it's going to make it so we can't eat food, just like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says. I mean, I'm really struck by how close the DeSantis platform and the RFK Jr. platform is right now, and they're going
Yeah.
on the same shows. Elon Musk gave RFK Jr. Some of the same platform. Is that where you want this party to go, whether or not DeSantis is the nominee? I mean, that's something the Republicans should be thinking about.
I mean, I wrote a piece a couple weeks ago. I guess it was right the Sunday before. We talked about it last week. It was the Sunday before Memorial Day, where I sort of cast it as like DeSantis and Trump are both trying to build cults. Like, rather than, and I don't necessarily mean that, even though Trump is cult like in many ways. I don't. What I mean to say is they're not trying to build a coalition of people kind of loosely held together. They're trying to build a small group of very dedicated um, supporters. But I do think that the barrier of entry into Trump's cult is much lower. Like, if you just go hunting and shop at Walmart, you could be in Trump's group, right? I mean, Make America Great Again is a pretty fairly inclusive, fairly digestible concept. Whereas what DeSantis is selling seems to be a little weirder and a little, there's a velvet rope letting you in to this club, which seems to me to be a weird move if you're trying to cobble together a majority coalition and you're not currently in the lead. I mean, it seems like a unusual move.
Well, look,
Um,
if you're not the front runner, you tend to have to start with a niche. You got to start. You can't be at zero.
so you're saying there is a rationale for what DeSantis is doing,
I mean,
in
I think
your opinion?
a bit less so the stance because he seemed to be poised to not be a niche candidate. He seemed to start with the
That's
potential
my
broader
point.
appeal, and he's
Yeah.
kind of
Wouldn't it
back
be
to being
okay?
a niche candidate.
If I'm running DeSantis's campaign, my philosophy is we need to do two things. Number one, peel off people who voted for Trump before under the guise that we're Trump but better. But simultaneously, and this is going to be hard to do, we need to reconstitute the Reagan coalition and bring people back in who couldn't vote for Trump. And if we could do both of those things, and it requires threading a needle, I get it. I don't think these are mutually exclusive, but there's some tension between doing these two things. But that wouldn't that be the most straightforward, clear way to actually win?
I mean, the way to be the insurgent candidate who actually wins is that you start with a niche, but you have a game plan to build beyond that. You got to pivot, and this was the point I made in my political piece a while back. I mean, Dean says this openly after the campaign. Did an interview with a HuffPost podcast, and he said, "I knew I had to make the turn, and I just couldn't do it. I would give speeches knowing I have to start
Yeah.
being more measured and start showing us prepared to be president, but it would just leave my immediate audience flat. I just couldn't leave them flat.
Okay,
So
but
it's easier said than done. But
I
that
totally agree, but I just think it's a bad analogy. I mean, Howard Dean was a nobody. He was the governor of Vermont. Nobody. He was like Burgum. I don't even know Burgum's first name. It would be like the governor of North Dakota.
yeah,
Like that was Howard Dean. That's not who Ron DeSantis was.
yeah,
Ron DeSantis was poised to be a strong contender. I'm not saying he was the front runner. He never was the front runner, but man, he was not starting off as a fringe candidate or a niche candidate.
right.
He was, and so again, I think your point is well made, but I don't feel like DeSantis needed to go through
No,
that
I think
process.
the Sanders momentum is in the wrong direction, which is why I think he's in a hard place because I mean it's kind of like this is a roughly analogous, but like Warren in 2020, she had this slow build through 2019. One new policy after another, showing that she has it all figured out. And she peaks in September 2019. And so here's the moment where she has to really show that she's going to go beyond just being the wonk professor. And she gets tripped up on healthcare, and she falls backwards, and can't figure out how to get that momentum, that forward momentum, back again. So DeSantis, in an earlier stage of the campaign, he had this sort of he had a slow build over the course of 2019, 2020, 2021, peaking with the midterm in 2022. With Trump getting pilloried for the bad midterm outcome because a lot of his candidates lose. So their numbers start to really, DeSantis never overtakes Trump. I mean, Warren actually had legitimate front-runner position very briefly in the fall of 2019. But DeSantis is kind of getting close to that point and didn't have had a plan. His plan was to pass a bunch of bills and then announce in the spring with a book tour in the middle of all that. And that plan got went haywire
Yeah.
because Donald Trump got indicted, and DeSantis didn't have a plan for that.
Bill, here's what I don't have a plan for. I have to write a column, which means I got to jump. We're at the 54-minute mark, and yet we did not talk about Chris Licht, Tucker Carlson's video, or the
Oh,
House Freedom Caucus. So here, let me propose something. I know you're going to want to speed through these, and we could pick one, but you could come on my podcast tomorrow, and we could spend another half hour, 45 minutes. I don't know what your Friday looks like.
I'm happy to do that, but you want to talk Licht, right? Because you're writing about Licht.
You know what? Um, if you're willing, I say we tease it, and you and I do a conversation tomorrow. I will be better prepared to talk about it. Although, I probably, well, yeah, let's do that. Is that cool?
That's fine.
Okay. All right. What do you got to plug?
So I got my piece at the Washington Monthly about the Republican wine track. I just mentioned two other monthly pieces of note.
Yeah.
We had one this week from Joseph Contreras about DeSantis's moderate year in 2019 when his appointees were helping implement DEI policies, for example, which has not gotten a lot of attention in the broader conversation. It's a really well done piece. I recommend that. And you mentioned Hawley before. I don't know if you had a chance to read this. This came out a week or so ago, but Will Norris wrote a piece about Hawley's book about manhood. I
Yes.
actually got on Morning Joe to talk about it.
Right. He's from Northampton, right?
He's from Northampton.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
See,
uh, you're paying attention.
I'm paying attention.
So if you haven't read that piece, man, I think you would like it a lot. So definitely you should go to the monthly site and check that out. So that's my main plugs for now.
I would recommend my piece at the Beast about Chris Christie. I think I was onto something. Nothing I haven't talked about here, but I write so much more eloquently than I talk. You know, you have time
that's not true.
Yeah, you're right. The writing's not necessarily great either. But hey, I'm a pro. If you are a conservative, I am hosting a workshop. I don't like the title, but it's called How to Be a Pundit at the Leadership Institute next Wednesday, June 14th. You can attend in person in Arlington, Virginia, or you can participate on Zoom. And
are you not allowed to attend if you're a liberal?
The Leadership Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. So you can attend. So it's not partisan, but it's for conservatives.
Yeah.
But honestly, the techniques are philosophically neutral. And if you've ever wanted to know how to write a book, in other words, get published as an author, how to pitch a column, start a YouTube channel, have a set up like I have behind me with lighting and all that stuff. How to get on TV as a commentator or a pundit, like all that we're going to talk about. So check it out, leadershipinstitute.org. And then lastly, of course, pre-order Filthy Rich Politicians. You can go to filthyrichbook.com and do that. And also get the bonuses, Bill, that I've been plugging for weeks. So a lot of stuff to do. And let me just finish with this. Good Lord willing, you and I will have a podcast conversation tomorrow where we're going to talk about CNN, Tucker, and the House Freedom Caucus. Check that out.
All right.
All right.
We'll talk to you tomorrow and next week back here in the DMZ.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Watch out for that purple haze out there. Be careful. Have a good one.